Hey, welcome Razballers to another edition of the Razball Fantasy Basketball Podcast. This week, it's me, Brent, as always, and today I am joined by our rookie dynasty guru, whatever enthusiast, whatever you want to call him, from all the way across the pond. He gets up at 3 a.m. to be on these calls and do these podcasts for you guys. So make sure you give him a shout out for that. We have Craig here with us today. Hey, Craig.
How you doing, Brent? Good to be here. Yeah, no, it's 3 a.m., but good time of year, eh? Playoff baseball, NBA preseason starting to wrap up, so we're not far away from the real deal now. So, yeah, exciting times.
Yeah, I heard there was some baseball going on. I don't know. I'm too busy with the NBA preseason and trying to figure out which rookies are going to actually do something this year. So let's kick it off with the biggest news story that's that for fantasy, for real life with the NBA. And, just like last year where there was some devastating season-ending injuries really early in the season that dampened a lot of teams' hopes and also took a lot of good fantasy basketball players off the board. Dejounte Murray is the latest to suffer that. He got a torn ACL trying to make a cut under the basket. The leg gave out on him. He was able to walk off on his own, but we did find out that it is a torn ACL. We have to assume he's out for the whole year. As far as fantasy goes. So, Craig, San Antonio, let's say you own Dejounte Murray. You're going to hit the waiver wire. Do you look for one of these guys from San Antonio, and who are you looking at? Or, are you better off, trying to grab like a Spencer Dinwiddie or a Reggie Jackson or somebody like that? What are your thoughts?
Well, first off, I was probably the low guy on Dejounte Murray going into the season anyway. He isn't the kind of point guard that I hold my hat on that I really want in fantasy. The defensive stats are nice, great rebounding, great steals, but he isn't a very good shooter. You get 0 threes out of him, and his assist rate is particularly low. Out of the guys that are probably available, the Spurs have come out and said that they're not looking to add through trade or through free agency. So the guy for me, I know Patty Mills is probably the experienced guy there, but Derek White is definitely the guy which I want out of San Antonio at the moment. Not just because I think that he will be starting, even if he doesn't start. Derek White has the positional flexibility and the size to play both the 1 and the 2. And what with Lonnie Walker hurt with the torn meniscus as well, I think there's going to be ample opportunity to play both point guard and shooting guard, regardless of whether Derek White starts or not. So out of the candidates there, Bryn Forbes, Patty Mills, Derek White's definitely the guy that I want to own. Part of the reason that I was kind of down on Dejounte Murray compared to his average draft position in a lot of drafts that I was doing was in the kind of 60s to 70s range, which was just way, way too high. And I thought that White was a bit of a threat to his playing time anyway. What with, it's difficult to trust Pop's rotational minutes at times. And Derek White does a lot of things well, which Dejounte Murray doesn't. So I thought that there could be, some form of a platoon there even before the injury. So I liked White beforehand, and I definitely like White now. How about you, Brent?
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think of the choices, Derek White, Bryn Forbes, Patty Mills. Patty Mills is just going to be what he's always been. Bryn Forbes, has kind of cut out a role for himself as a decent, NBA role player off the bench. White's the guy who, there was some talk about him breaking out this year. Anyway, like Craig said, and he's got what Dejounte Murray has and more. He has the shooting to go along with it. Everyone was kind of hoping Dejounte Murray's outside shot was going to come around this year. That would legitimize his ADP, but that was still kind of a long shot. But White actually has that, and now it seems like he's going to have all the minutes he can handle for San Antonio. We know Pop can be a little bit fickle with his rotations and a little bit stubborn, but I think even Popovich understands this season that they're going to need to, get a miracle from somebody, and maybe White's that guy. So yeah, I mean, if I lost Murray in a league and White's still available, that would be probably my first pickup there.
Do you not also feel that San Antonio have kind of prioritized the development of White this summer? In summer league, he was definitely the focal point of the team, probably more so than Lonnie Walker in terms of what they were trying to see that they had out of him. As both a ball handler and off of the ball. I mean, his summer league was great. He's, in the preseason game the other day, he looked, not the last one, the one before, he looked really, really strong. And again, it was interesting to see that they, were giving him plenty of time on and off the ball to see what they had here. Team USA, he had a really successful summer. Everything just seems to be trending in the right direction for White. I mean, and he just seems like the kind of guy Greg Popovich would love as well. High IQ player, not necessarily an elite passer, I would say, but for me, a much better distributor than what Dejounte Murray is. And given the way that San Antonio play with lots of ball movement, perimeter shooters, he just feels very much like a Pops guy, which was kind of why I was, in on him before the Murray injury, and even more so now. Would you say that's fair?
Oh yeah, I think Murray had always kind of been an atypical as far as what Popovich likes to see in a point guard. I think, but Murray was attractive because he could sort of give you those Ben Simmons light kind of lines and had that potential
without the assists.
Yeah, and mostly we were kind of, I think everyone was hoping that stuff would come around. And when I'm drafting a fantasy basketball team, I try not to hope too much until I get to maybe the last couple picks. Then I'll throw a Hail Mary for a Miles Bridges or something like that. But where Murray was being drafted, there was definitely more established choices, I'm sure. And I agree. White seems to fit their system. They do like to have big men surrounded by outside shooters, and yeah, he definitely fits that mold. So I do like White. What do you know about him as far, coming out of college? And I'm not too familiar with White's story.
Well, he was, believe it or not, he was a Division II college basketball player, so he kind of flew a bit under the radar compared to some of the bigger guys.
He was definitely off my radar.
He was still drafted back into the first round. One of those San Antonio. Yeah. Sometimes I think the general perception would be, if you don't really follow the draft that closely, is who's this guy that San Antonio has drafted, if that makes sense.
Yeah, they must know something.
He definitely fell into more that mold, and he was definitely perceived a bit more at the time as one of those very good fits for the way San Antonio play. I mean, he's a combo guard. I wouldn't necessarily say that he's a true point guard. I mean, he's 6'5", 6'6", if you like, so he's got plenty of size. Does a lot of things really, really well without really necessarily standing out in one particular area. I mean, he can finish around the rim. He's able to block shots. But part of the attraction was his ability to play both the one and the two. Unselfish player. There's a lot to like there. Is he necessarily stat stuffing? Probably not, but it's difficult. I mean, when was the last time we really saw a stat stuffing point guard out of San Antonio? It's been a very, very long time, hasn't it? But I still think there's plenty to like there. He can defend enough to, again, not necessarily a premium defender, I'd say, but there's enough there to keep him on the court. Like I said, good size, 6'5". I just think that ability to be able to mix and match between the point guard and the shooting guard position is going to, especially with Lonnie Walker's minutes going to be available at the start of the season. Not that we were expecting too many out the gate anyway. Danny Green out of town. I just think there's plenty of opportunity there, and he does enough things well. He's a decent shooter, decent passer. I think you could do a lot worse.
Definitely. So yeah, I would definitely, if you're listening to this and And you need a point guard, even if you didn't lose Murray. White is definitely somebody who needs to be owned in most leagues. So the other big news story, besides the Murray injury, was out of Phoenix. The Suns fired their GM 8 days before the start of the season. Craig, you sounded like you had heard some news on possibly why he had been fired, and maybe it wasn't some inner office conspiracy, but something that was kind of staring us all right in the face.
Well, I think it's just Sava being Sava, isn't it?
Yep.
Having to have his fingers in the pie, making demands. Something I heard, and again, this is hearsay, I can't atone to exactly how much of it is true and how much of it isn't, is that McDonough was given a 30-day window to bring in a starting caliber point guard that was going to help them win now. And that didn't really materialize. All the sort of noise that was coming out was, in order to Phoenix to be able to do that, they'd have to give up an unprotected future first, and the value just wasn't there to be able to do it. I mean, I'm in no way a McDonough fan. I think there was plenty of reasons for him to go. I think the timing was just absolutely horrific, though. But I think that a lot of it is a case of Sava now being able to put in James Jones, a yes man that,
They said he's been being groomed for this role since he joined the organization.
Yeah, I think he's a very popular guy within the organisation. I think he's a good link between those downstairs and them upstairs. I just fear that it's a guy that Sava wants because it's going to allow Sava to call the shots, which I suppose to some degree he's entitled to. But it's not.
Well, they did have a co-GM. I don't know his name right off the top of my head. I'll flash it on the screen, but he's more of the numbers guy, the cap specialist. So it seems like Jones will be more of the player guy, maybe the scouting kind of guy, where they have sort of their Moneyball cap specialist expert sort of helping them behind the scenes.
Yeah, I think what's going to be interesting now is, if it is true that there was this 30-day window to get this point guard, that, starting caliber point guard that was going to help them win now, is that still the case? Are we now going to see Phoenix being really aggressive in the trade market again? Bearing in mind, the season starts next week. I mean, it's certainly a possibility. I think it's going to be an interesting month in Phoenix, that's for sure. Still trying to find their identity. And I think some of this stems back to the Zaire Smith and Michael Bridges trade, where, they gave up Zaire Smith, or the rights to Zaire Smith, with the 16th pick, I think it was.
Yeah, and that Heat pick, yeah.
Plus that future first to bring in Bridges. And I think, it was one of those trades, we've spoken about it before. It kind of didn't make, although I admired the win now approach for Phoenix, for me, it didn't really make that much sense. And it that future first certainly seemed like a lot to give up to get a guy that was essentially a 3-year, college player. Zaire Smith himself, supremely talented. And I think that if they could rewind the clock, had they kept that future first, and it would have been an asset, I'm sure, that would have helped land this starting caliber point guard that they've been after. So I think that it's part of me thinks that if we rewind back to that was kind of the beginning of the end for McDonough. As I think that giving up that future first really kind of limited some of their assets trade negotiation wise. Because you look at what they got, I mean, who is it that they've really got that that is really tradable and relatively attractive? I mean, TJ Warren, possibly.
He's someone they probably would love to trade. But I don't know that I think other teams would be interested in him as kind of a complementary piece, but not as the face of a trade for someone like a Kemba Walker or something like that. Maybe for a Patrick Beverly or.
He is on an attractive contract, though, I think, isn't he? TJ Warren. So yeah. It's not that. I think that TJ Warren, I'm just trying to find his contract now. It's not that I don't think he's not an attractive piece at all. Yeah, I'm just looking at his salary now. Yeah, it's very attractive salary.
I think he's got a couple years left, probably
2 million, I think he's on.
seven figures. Yeah.
I mean, from that point of view, it is a deal. So there is potential for that there. But they signed Trevor Ariza, didn't they? The development of Josh Jackson's got to be a priority given the premium draft pick that they'd given up. If Devin Booker doesn't play the one, that's another wing there. Giving up the draft pick, or essentially 2 first-round draft picks if you include Zaire Smith there to get Mikal Bridges, that just seemed like a lot. There is this logjam at the wing position in Phoenix. So if there is a guy that I think is tradable, it's going to be TJ Warren, if you ask me.
Yep.
But I think it's definitely an interesting thing to just keep an eye out over the next month, whether they are going to push for this point guard or if they are going to sort of go with this Shaq Harrison, Elie Okobo, DeAnthony Melton, trio, if you like, until Booker comes back. I mean, you're the Arizona guy. What's your, any news in your neck of the woods?
Yeah, I mean, mostly, it looks like Booker is pushing to make it back for opening day. So it seems like very quickly into the beginning of the season, we might see that Devin Booker point guard situation. But I definitely, the organization definitely does not want him to be their point guard. But because of that log jam at the wing, they do have to do something. So if you slide Booker over a point, then you can start Josh Jackson at the 2 and Ariza at the 3, which, brings Warren off sort of as a 6th man to replace one of them. I think that the firing is a sign that we're going to see a trade really soon. And what would be really interesting is if they do pull off that trade before Jimmy Butler even leaves Minnesota, because now it looks like Jimmy Butler may start the year on the team. So, yeah, I mean, I liked what I saw from Okobo, but, obviously he's a rookie, he's young, and taking over as point guard will be tough. I think Isaiah Cannon could definitely play and keep the team, give them more of a real point guard out there and let Booker work more off the ball. But I liked, Booker as point guard last year was really interesting, and his fantasy value skyrocketed when you started adding in those extra assists. So,
but do you not think it takes something away? I mean, Phoenix they've shut the window now on this rebuild, haven't they? And do you not think that if you play Booker as a point guard, it hurts your team from a real life perspective too much?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's what all the experts are worried about, and they definitely don't want that. So it'll be interesting to see if they make a push for a big name, or if they go for somebody like a Dinwiddie or a Beverly. I don't know. I mean, I think we're gonna see something really soon. I don't think they want the Booker experiment to last that long. But if I'm a Booker fantasy owner, I'm perfectly happy with him. Since this is a fantasy basketball podcast, I'm perfectly happy with him playing point guard for as long as he can, because I think it's really going to boost his fantasy value. From a fantasy perspective, do you like the Booker at point?
Yeah, from a fantasy perspective, I've got no issues with Devin Booker playing the point. I think it can only help. I do worry a little bit about it potentially taking, 3-pointers away from him. I don't think he's necessarily got that ability to separate like a elite level point guards, if you like, to create his own shot off the dribble whilst under pressure, if that makes sense. One thing I did want to ask you is, could you see potential of, something which seems to have been quite clear this, I was about to say summer league, this postseason? Oh, God.
Preseason?
Preseason.
Preseason is sort of still postseason.
They've put the ball in Josh Jackson's hands a lot. I don't know how much of Phoenix that you've seen this preseason, but they're experimenting with Josh Jackson playing the 2, TJ Warren coming off the bench, and with that they've looked to Josh Jackson to become a bit more of a perimeter creator, if that makes sense. Do you think there's some potential there that they could potentially play Jackson at the 3, Ariza at the 4, Booker at the 2, and Melton at the 1, and maybe look for their perimeter playmaking ability to come from Booker and Jackson, and then use the point guard by offensively as a position by name only?
Yeah, I mean that's probably what we're gonna see based off how Jackson's been used here in the preseason. What's scary is that, as athletic as Jackson is, I still don't know that his decision making is the best, and and his shooting is still super inconsistent. So it's not like he's going to stretch defenses when he's got the ball out there. They're just going to be able to collapse in on Ayton for the most part on the nights that his shot isn't falling. So I mean, I think they'd love to try it, but man, I don't know. The Suns could end up being the worst team in the West this year by a big margin, unless they're able to pull off some kind of miracle point guard trade.
See, I don't think that at all. I think that the pieces that they have brought in, for me, do add value and do add wins. I think the point guard situation will sort itself out, and I do think Okobo and Melton are better players than what people necessarily, real life players than what people necessarily give them credit.
Well, and I like Cannon too. I think we keep leaving him out of the conversation. Okobo and Melton are still rookies, where Cannon has some experience, and the little bit I've seen him this preseason, I was pretty impressed. I think he can handle himself out there.
Oh yeah, he can handle himself, but he's not a starting caliber point guard for me. He is what he is, which is a solid backup NBA point guard. And what is he? 28 years old now, I guess.
He's getting up there. Yeah.
I can't envisage anything more than that now. I mean, Cannon was a great player at Murray State. I mean, there's no denying that. I don't know. I think Okobo's got some real offensive flashes, and DeAnthony Melton himself, I think he can handle himself out there as a more kind of 3-and-D type point guard rather than an elite NBA caliber, facilitator, if that makes sense. But I don't know. It's interesting. I think that log jam at the wing position is definitely something to keep an eye on. I do like the chemistry that I've seen between Josh Jackson and DeAndre Ayton out there in the preseason. You're right. I don't disagree that Josh Jackson's shooting is still very much a work in progress, and some of the decision making. Sometimes I find that it's almost like he's made a decision, predetermined, rather than necessarily reading the court at that particular time. Especially when it comes to sort of driving the lane with the ball in his hand. But I think they'll add some wins. I just think it's something we need to keep an eye on, especially this point guard situation, because like you said, the firing has happened for a reason in the time, and I do wonder whether this is now the green light to James Jones to say, go out and get me a point guard.
I mean, a week from now, we could be talking about Melton and Warren being on the move, along with a pick to bring somebody in.
So who's out there? Do you think, really? I mean,
we've heard realistically, I think like Spencer Dinwiddie, Tyus Jones. I know they would love, and Patrick Beverly. At the higher level, Kemba Walker's, there's been a lot of trade talk around him.
Yeah, I can't see Kemba moving. I think that, I know he's an unrestricted free agent at the end of the season. I think that Charlotte are going to be in a more let's wait and see approach rather than necessarily looking to force anything now, especially with Borrego trying to find some identity there. I always look at that Toronto position and think that is Fred VanVleet or DeLon Wright, being wasted there. But again, we don't know what the Kyle Lowry situation is going to be like at the end of the season.
Yeah, that was something I was going over with someone on Twitter, is kind of who's the heir apparent to Kyle Lowry up in Toronto. Is it Van Vliet or is it Wright?
I think that there'll be a lot of this season trying to find out, really. I like both guys for different reasons. But I think that it is a luxury that they do have, and there is ways that you can get both of them on the court. So it's not that I hate the decision of having 3 possible starting caliber point guards in the NBA on your roster. But I think that this is a really interesting times in Toronto, and I think that there is definitely an eye towards what is going to happen next season and what the best path is. And I think that at this point, Lowry does seem to be a bit disgruntled there, so I think it's entirely possible that they're kind of hedging their bets a bit and will be keeping VanVleet and Wright around, especially given the contracts that they're on.
Yep, totally agree. So let's jump from the Phoenix Suns mess. We went from the Spurs mess to the Suns mess, and there's another mess that fantasy people are going to be watching closely, and that's what's going on in Golden State with their center position. Kerr has come out and said that he's going to use the center by committee, obviously until Cousins returns. Then that committee will be over, and Cousins will be the starting center. But Damian Jones seems to be the favorite to start against the bigger centers. And then, Jordan Bell or Kevon Looney will be out there against some more athletic guys. I know they played Bell and Looney together a lot this preseason as maybe, an energy duo off the bench when Green's resting and Jones goes and sits down. They've sort of alternated good games this preseason. Obviously, Bell seems to have the most fantasy upside as far as, blocks, being able to get assists, steals. Jones does offer a little bit, but he seems to be more of the Zaza Pachulia, like there'll be a good 1 out of every 6 games will be something good. And then Kevon Looney, sort of the wild card, where, he's had some very fantasy-friendly Jordan Bell type lines in the past with, a couple steals, couple blocks, 5 or 6 boards, 5 or 6 assists. So what, Craig, could you help us figure out this mess? Is Jordan Bell still the one to own? Does it make you want to stay away from Bell and the situation altogether now? What are your thoughts?
No, I don't. Excuse me. No, I don't think so at all. I think that this totally makes sense, sticking Damian Jones as your starting centre out there. I think you're going to get the best out of a guy like Jordan Bell in the second unit. And, like something I always say is I'm not too worried about who's starting and who's not. I'm more interested in the minutes and the usage rate. And I think that a guy like Jordan Bell is going to have a lot more fantasy value for owners if he's starts in the second unit as opposed to, starting with the first unit, because he's going to get more minutes against the opposition's, bench. I think there's more chance for an offense to run through him. Like you said, one of the more underrated aspects of Jordan Bell's game is his ability to facilitate. So I think that if you're able to almost, strategically have him on the court at times when, say, a Draymond Green isn't on the court, it can only help his fantasy value, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And, any semblance of Draymond Green's game that Jordan Bell can bring to the court is going to be awesome for anyone who took him later in their fantasy draft. I do still like Bell. I think Bell's the one to own of the 3. I do get a little bit concerned when Cousins comes back, though. But if Bell is going to be that energy guy off the bench, then even when Cousins is back, he's really going to just take everything away from Damian Jones, and Bell's still going to fill that backup Draymond role.
Well, I mean, what were you expecting from Bell minutes wise anyway? I
was hoping for at least maybe 20 to 25.
Yeah, and I don't think anything's changed in regards to minutes wise. I mean, starting is just in name only, really, right?
Oh,
I
yeah.
mean, it in a lot of cases, it actually hinders fantasy value, because if you're going to start in that Warriors unit, your usage rate is going to absolutely plummet. So
definitely the fifth option.
Yeah, I don't think anything's changed for Jordan Bell. DeMarcus Cousins, I want, I've said it time and time again, so it's probably sounding a bit like a broken record, but I don't want any real part of him at all because of the low success rate of ever coming back the same player from an Achilles injury.
Agreed. Yeah.
But even when Cousins does come back, are the Warriors? I mean, I don't think it's a situation where the Warriors are just going to throw Cousins out there for 30 minutes, and if it happens during the fantasy season, Cousins comes in and plays 15 to 18 minutes possibly, doesn't play back-to-back sets. It's definitely, I think, more of a let's see what we've got for the playoffs in DeMarcus Cousins.
And Cousins came out and said it himself. He said, I'm going to have games where I shoot only 4 times, and I'm going to have some games where I'm the leading scorer. But do you really want to be a part of that, like, hit and miss, trying to predict which games he's going to bust out on?
But again, talk is cheap, right? Especially coming off an injury like that. Yes, I've seen the videos of him dunking and, that he's ahead of schedule and all of this, but this is the NBA, right? I mean, it's highly physical, and even just, half a step lost in your lateral movement or your agility or anything, it makes huge differences. I mean,
all that ability that separated him from the next tier of centers, he's been cut off. Like, it's been taken away.
There's one thing dunking on YouTube or whatever with nobody in front of you. There's another thing dunking with Aaron Baines in your face, sort of hustling around.
Well, some giant, an Andre Drummond's in there.
I don't want to, bump Bell down at all because of any sort of DeMarcus Cousins news, and I think that given the severity of the injury, even when Cousins returns, I still think Bell's going to get his. I think you've just got to more temper expectations of what you expect from Cousins necessarily than Bell. But I'm all for Bell being in the second unit. I think that there's a chance for the assist rate to go up. He'll definitely get a higher usage rate there. I mean, we're not talking about a guy that we expect elite points from anyway. We're pretty much looking for blocks, some nice assists from the position, kind of that sort of high floor defensive stats kind of guy. So
I'm a little more worried about Looney cutting into Bell's production.
Well, I mean, Looney himself was a really talented player. I mean, he's still only 22 himself, and he was
UCLA, right?
UCLA. I mean, he was really considered a lottery pick, and then before the injury came around, super talented player, and been really unlucky, obviously, with injuries. So yeah, I mean, he himself is a threat, but again, let's wait and see it with Looney. Let's see him put together a healthy run with some serious minutes. But no, I don't necessarily disagree with you, Ray. I think Looney to me is a far more talented option than what Damian Jones is necessarily. But it's just a bit of a mess, isn't it? In terms of, I don't think you can read too much into anything other than Bell's the guy really to own at this point. The Warriors like Bell. Bell himself obviously has his own little injury concerns as well. He's been banged up quite a bit last year, so that's obviously something which has got to be on the back of your mind.
Yeah, I mean, if you still have drafts left, you're going to get Bell at a steal because of all this news. You probably get him maybe 2 rounds later than where he was going, a few weeks ago.
every draft is different, isn't it? Like,
Well, it depends. Yeah, if you're with a bunch of guys
depends
who
who's
are
in
in the
the league.
know or a bunch of Razzball readers.
But yeah, there's no real change for me. I don't care if Jones starts, Looney starts, or Bell starts. Bell's the guy that I want to own.
Okay. So one more mess, and then we're going to get to our quick fire. Lonzo Ball is expected to take the court for the first time with LeBron James this week. Rondo has, looked pretty good. He's looked his normal Rondo self, under 10 points, but a ton of assists on a team with a bunch of athletes who are finally getting to play with someone who puts the ball where it needs to be when they're making those cuts. They're not going to be frustrated anymore with making a cut and not getting the ball where they want it. And I mean, just the idea of having Ball, Rondo, and LeBron James on the court, even maybe at the same time at some point, with like an Ingram or an Kuzma, super athletic guys just cutting and rolling to the hoop with these passers out there. I mean, obviously, it's a purist sort of dream, but what can we expect from Ball? How much is Rondo going to cut into what he's doing? Is Rondo fantasy ownable? There's a lot of questions here that I have. I know you're a big Lonzo Ball for fantasy fan, for Dynasty. Do you think Rondo hurts Ball this year, or do you think Ball's going to do his thing?
If you give me a choice out of Rondo and Ball, it's definitely Ball is the guy that I want.
Ball's shot might be ugly, but at least he takes it and makes it. Rondo's not going to score.
Yeah. In terms of actual scoring, I'm not drafting Lonzo Ball to be, a 20 points a game scorer or anything like that. Let's also remember, that Lonzo Ball was in his rookie year last year as a one and done freshman out of UCLA. He's still super, super young and was still on any given night a triple double threat when he was healthy. I think that the Rondo signing is great news for Ball in the long term. I think, is there a better guy that a guy like Lonzo could be learning from? Fierce competitor like Rondo, somewhat similar player to Rondo Prime, good boards, good assists, good defensive numbers as well, high IQ. And I think the personnel around really is going to allow Lonzo to do what he does best, which is really create. He is an elite level passer. I think having better players around him, in regards to guys like LeBron, for example, I think can only be a benefit. I think the field goal percentage is a little bit, yes, the shot is ugly, shooting from the side of his face. But he did shoot, he shot over 52% or something in college. So the potential's there for it to rise. I'm not expecting anything near that in the NBA. But I still think he's a better finisher and better shooter than he necessarily showed last year. And I think just in natural progression from a 19, 20-year-old, you kind of expect some inefficiency woes in regards to the shooting season one, regardless of whether they're a good shooter or not.
That's the most common. It seems to be the most common thing with rookies is shooting percentage.
I totally agree with that. And I think some of that is, learning to play against superior defenders, and not just necessarily superior defenders, but more physical defenders as well. I find not necessarily, Lonzo Ball's a point guard with excellent size, but you see a lot of these guys that come through that are 6'3", 6'4", a lot of these guards, and it is a big, big transition. The physicality of it, the difference in being able to finish around the rim in college and in the NBA, you're really putting your body on the line in the NBA, whereas not necessarily so much college-wise. But going back to Ball, last year he had 34 minutes a game. I'm not necessarily seeing 34 minutes, but I think that he could be 28, 29, 30 minutes. Ball's still their point guard of the future at this point. And in 29, 30 minutes, I think we're still going to see much of the stuff that you're drafting him for. I could, with LeBron James and better shooters around him, I could definitely see an assist rate between 7 and 8. He'll get his rebounds. He averaged nearly seven rebounds a game last year. The steals will be there. I mean, if you're drafting Ball, you just know that the percentages are not going to be great. You're not going to get elite scoring, but everything else is going to kind of be there,
Yeah, and I mean, having a LeBron on the team is going to maybe give him that little extra space he didn't have last year to get his shot off more confidently. So I could definitely see his shooting percentage going up. He's gonna get a lot more open looks. And the Lakers, as Son has been saying, they're gonna push the ball, and there's gonna be a lot of fantasy relevant guys on that Laker team with the style of play that they're gonna have. They're obviously I've bumped Ingram up my ranks. I think that just playing with LeBron James is gonna help Ingram get to that next level. Playing with the Rondo is gonna help Ball get to that next level. Josh Hart, I mean, these guys, Kuzma, these guys were great as rookies, and now they're playing with two of the smartest guys, best basketball minds to ever play in LeBron and Rondo. I just can't see how that doesn't rub off on them. And maybe I'm drinking the LeBron to LA Kool-Aid, but everywhere LeBron's gone, there's been a little bit of growing pains in that first season. So I'm not thinking that they're going to make it to the Western Conference Finals or something like some people have suggested. But there's going to be growing pains. It's not going to be pretty. But I think what will happen right away is the fantasy play, the stats for these guys are going to go up. I do think there will be nights where certain guys disappear, though, like Kuzma disappears, Hart disappears. Of all those guys, Ball seems like he's probably going to have the most consistent stats when he's healthy, because he will get rebounds and push the break. He will get the ball in his hands to start the offense quite a bit. So I think, LeBron, Ball, and probably Ingram, and then Rondo for whatever he does, are going to be pretty steady as far as their numbers go. But even Ingram, I think, is going to have some off nights too. So I think people need to be careful not to, jump ship on a Josh Hart or somebody like that if they start a little bit slow. Because I think once they get used to each other and the season's really in full swing, those off nights are going to become fewer and fewer, and they're going to put up some really nice fantasy numbers in that type of offense.
Let me ask you this. Who would be in fantasy, who would be the second Laker off the board behind LeBron James for you?
I mean, it comes down to Lonzo and Ingram as who the second one off the board would be. I would say Lonzo, because I think he's going to be more consistent from a fantasy perspective, and I think he's going to give you more well-rounded lines. But I do think Ingram's going to – what Ingram can do that Lonzo can't do is Ingram's going to have some 40-point nights, where Lonzo's not really going to have those. But Lonzo is going to have some awesome stat stuffing triple-double type of nights, where Ingram might not necessarily have that. So I do like Lonzo second off the board, but I would bump Ingram up a little bit. Yeah, where does that stand for you?
No, I'm the same. I have Lonzo the second Laker. I found myself in drafts, especially if you're drafting at the 10 in, let's say, a 12 or 14 man league. I found myself often missing out on those top tier point guards. Let's say you draft at the 10 in a 12 team league and you end up with, say, Paul George and Oladipo. Neither.
Yeah.
It's a great start, but
yeah.
You find yourself lacking in assists quite early, because then you miss out on that whole run of the Lowrys, Pauls, Kembers, Walls, all those guys, because you're not picking again until 36 or something like that.
Yep.
So what I've sort of found myself ended up sort of kind of doing is, if I'm not punting assists by that point, or I might get lucky and end up with a Draymond Green or somebody like that to help sort of ease those concerns, is I found myself almost adopting a punt field goal percentage strategy, and sort of ending up with Lonzo Ball and Trae Young in that kind of mid-rounds area, knowing full well that the shooting efficiency is going to be poor. You get to that point in the draft where you either got to get the assists or not. And unless, in that sort of territory, you're looking at Rubio, Lonzo Ball and Trae Young really being the best options for assists. So I've sort of found myself almost, not necessarily chasing assists because I don't mind Trae Young and Lonzo Ball in that territory anyway. But it kind of adds that appeal to me to a guy like Lonzo or Trae Young because I know what I'm going to get out of them is very difficult to get later in the draft. Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I found myself getting, going for a Nicholas Batum or a Marcus Saul or guys who give you 4 or 5 assists from a different position and then getting like a Jeff Teague or something later to sort of cap it off. But I do want to get into, sort of our ending speed round here. And I thought today, since we have Craig, our Dynasty rookie expert, I want to throw out some rookie names that have sort of been bouncing around. They've even been like top ads on Yahoo waiver wires and things like that because of what they've been doing in the preseason. And I want Craig to pee in all our Cheerios here and rain on our parade and let us know, are these guys going to be ownable in fantasy this year or not? So let me throw out a couple names to you, Craig, just to get some ideas. I'm going to avoid sort of the Miles Bridgeses and stuff like that who we really hyped on already. We know they're probably going to have some value, but I want to throw out a few names that has popped up recently. So the first name that seems to be pretty popular on waiver wires right now is Harry Giles. We've talked about him, supreme athlete, but maybe a year or two away. Is Harry Giles should be on fantasy teams this season?
I think so. I think the only concern I had about Harry Giles, and I've said it before, was the health, and he's doing nothing but showing that he looks healthy and he looks ready. He's way less rusty than I expected him to be at this point. And what I really wanted to see from him in Summer League and in the preseason is, strides towards shaking that rust. And every game, he just looks better and better. He's going to be a big asset for the Kings now and beyond because of their willingness to want to play fast pace, how good he is in transition. And one of the most underrated aspects of his game is how good of a facilitator that he is. I mean, some of the passes that we've seen pre-season, I don't know if you saw the one, was it last night or the night before, bounce pass behind the back to Bagley. There was a, quick hands pass the other day to Bagley as well. That's, you can really, this is a guy they really could run an offense through. And for an all-round talent, he was a high school phenom, one of the best players, ever sort of graced the high school basketball floor, if you like, before derailed with injuries. I think that you want to be getting all the shares of Harry Giles that you can, really, in Dynasty and Keeper. In redraft, probably a little bit less aggressive, but he's certainly giving the Kings something to think about, even in the short term.
Now, another guy who wasn't even drafted, but has been the leading scorer for the New York Knicks in all their preseason games. He's had the most usage. I think he led in assists and three-point percentage or something too. And the coach has done nothing but, David Fizdale has done nothing but talk highly of this guy. Alonzo Trier from University of Arizona, he was on a G League contract. Can he break into this Knicks rotation? Should people be picking him up? I see him as the most added player in 12-team Yahoo leagues.
Not for me. I like Alonzo Trier as a player, and I think that the fact that he went undrafted is a bit of a misnomer. There was obviously the whole drugs test thing last year that kept him out for a large portion. I say large, I don't think it was that large. There was enough sort of mystery surrounding him that it kind of really hurt his draft stock. I think it's a player with good size. I mean, he's a real scoring threat. I think you just got to look at in the short term, the options that the Knicks have got in terms of just volume of guys that can play both guard positions is just too much of a red flag for me to be really interested. That isn't to say that I don't like Alonzo Trier as a player. He's a shooting guard really that's got excellent size, can really score on a number of levels. And I definitely think that he could secure a rotational spot. I just can't see there being enough there really being a path to being any kind of fancy relevant minutes, at least in the short term.
I have another name, and this guy's been moving up the most added list too, and he had a big game tonight. This is Tuesday night. We're recording this. Is Hamidou Diallo? He does seem to have a path to playing time potentially with Andre Robertson out for the next 2 months at least, and Ferguson being sort of an unknown. I mean, he's a decent bench role player, but he's not, on a team that's missing Russell Westbrook. That Dennis Schrader seems to be the second scoring option, and perhaps Steven Adams is your third scoring option at this point. It could, Hamidou Diallo get some minutes here at least early on and become maybe the second or third scoring option on this team?
I can't see it at all. I think you looked at Hamidou Diallo in college. He still looked very raw at Kentucky even last year. I mean, he reclassified and joined Kentucky the same year that Kentucky had the likes of De'Aaron Fox, Isaiah Briscoe, and Malik Monk and Bam Adebayo. But he sat out that year and was sort of learning off the floor, if you like. Then sort of was penciled in as one of the possible star men last year. Was very much sort of outshined by Kevin Knox and the emergence of Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. So it didn't really go his way. A lot of inconsistent play last year. Was really naive on the defensive end at times, which isn't that uncommon at Kentucky, especially given the pace and the high motor that's required. And offensively looked really raw. So I love the athleticism. I mean, this is a guy that had a 45-inch vertical in the combine, not this year, the year before he withdrew his name from the hat. There's definitely potential there, and it's definitely intriguing. I think that it's just way too soon to read too much into any kind of preseason numbers. And I think given the importance more from that kind of position on the defensive aspect of things, I think that Timothy Luwawu-Cabarrot is going to be a much more attractive option than him for minutes from the get-go, and the same with Terrence Ferguson, really.
Okay, so I have one last name, and then I have a quick one I want to throw at the end, who's not a rookie, but it's an interesting update. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, you mentioned him, being at Kentucky with Diallo. The Clippers have a pretty deep roster in the front court, or the back court, with, they have Patrick Beverly, Avery Bradley, Teodosic, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. Can he get some time with the Clippers? Do you think he'll be fantasy relevant this season?
I think he has every shot to be fantasy relevant at some point. It's not a guy that I'm really aggressively drafting in redraft leagues. I think that given Doc Rivers is still the coach, I think that Doc is going to do anything that he can to win. And I think that that's going to hinder Shai's not necessarily development, but his chance at getting minutes and, fantasy relevant numbers to start with. I mean, he has a shot, right? I mean, if he plays himself into contention, there's a non-zero chance of that. I think just given who's the coach, I think that they're going to be at least pushing to see if they can get themselves into the playoff mix in the early part of the season. I find Shai's offensive game a little bit predictable at times. I still think there's quite a lot more that's needed for him to really be able to perform to a high level on the offensive side in the NBA. I think that he will get there as a player that I like a lot. I mean, he certainly emerged, I wouldn't say from nowhere, but he wasn't a 5-star recruit at Kentucky. He wasn't considered one of the guys that they were going to heavily rely upon, and he was arguably, their best player on the offensive end. I think the more intriguing thing for me is the defensive. I can definitely see the defensive potential there, and I think that in the long term, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander is definitely a player that I'm invested in the long term. I think in redraft leagues, and given that the depth at the the Clippers have in terms of volume with the amount of players that can play the 1 and the 2. I think Shai at this point is more just a wait and see approach for me rather than necessarily taking a late round flyer on him. But it's definitely a guy that I'd love to be proved wrong on, that's for sure.
Yeah, and I think Lou Williams is there too. So the last one I'm going to do is this second-year guy, but he's going to be the starting shooting guard, it looks like, over Buddy Hield on the Kings, and that's Frank Mason the third. He's starting to jump up the added list with the news that he could start opening day as the starting shooting guard, at least until Bog is back. Is Frank Mason somebody you would take a look at?
I think, again, not necessarily in redraft leagues, but I think you've definitely got to speculate, right? Especially given that they want to play at this fast pace. That's going to create some fantasy goodness. I think he had an excellent preseason game the other night. So he have like 8 assists and 5 steals or something like that. So yeah. He's definitely played.
He's shooting 57% from 3 this preseason.
Yeah, I mean, again, I'm not going to read too much into the percentages from preseason. I'm more interested in the shot form. I think that there's, it's a bit of a double-edged sword here. I think part of it as well is, do the Kings see Buddy Hield coming off the bench and potentially having that high usage rate off the bench more valuable to them as a starter? I think this could be more about Buddy Hield than it is necessarily Frank Mason. So, I wouldn't be worried too much about Buddy Hield. I mean, I'm not the biggest Buddy Hield lover by any stretch of the imagination, but I don't think this necessarily hurts his value too much, because I think this is going to be more to do with a on-floor chemistry, what's our best rotation, and getting certain guys to play with certain players, rather than necessarily saying that, Frank Mason's our guy and Buddy
just
Hield
preparing Hield for when Bog is back and for the bench role they kind of plan for him to have.
I don't even necessarily think that. I think it's the Kings trying to maximize 2 rotations that are going to work well together.
Yep.
I mean, obviously, there's more to it than just a starters unit and a second unit. But I think there's definitely an element of chemistry, a new style of play. And I think it's about trying to get the right guys playing with the right people, rather than necessarily saying we're going to stick our 5 best players on the court to start the game. So I wouldn't worry too much about it from a Buddy Hield point of view. I definitely think it boosts Frank Mason's value, because it's kind of taken away a little bit of the Yogi Ferrell threat, or probably limits Justin Jackson's minutes volume as well throughout a game. But they've got 2 preseason games left. They're definitely going to be games I have a lot of interest in as well, to try and iron out exactly what's going to be happening with the Kings rotations. But there's going to be some fancy goodness there. They're going to be I think a really popular waiver wire team, if you like. So on any given sort of week or month, I think there's going to be a lot of hot hands that are going to be available on the waiver wire. So don't dismiss the Kings as fantasy options just because they're the Kings. We might not see many guys get average 30 plus minutes a night, but there's definitely going to be a lot of hot hands there, especially with the new pace of play.
Yeah, I mean, you have to be excited if you're a Sacramento fan after a lot of years. I mean, they definitely have something going on there, and hopefully they don't go the direction of the Phoenix Suns and they stick to the plan and make it work. So, well, thanks, Craig. That's our hour for our podcast this week. Thanks for joining me. I always learn something when we do these together, and I always run right to my fantasy leagues to make moves too after getting your opinion. So thank you. Remember to like and subscribe to the channel, help us grow, leave comments. That helps a lot too, and we love to hear from you. If you have any questions about fantasy or want to tell us what you think about what we're talking about, and visit the website basketball.rasball.com. We all write regular articles on there, and those have great message boards too. Craig, any parting words?
Yeah, just always a pleasure and never a chore.
Appreciate it, and we'll see you next week.